Bogus jobs data is keeping interest rates high, but why? Hey everyone, it's Wolfgang. So we all know that the economy feels a little soft. Many of us have been suspicious. We're told one thing by the government, by the Fed, that the economy is fine, it's booming. In fact, the economy is doing so well, it's creating inflation because the economy is so strong. We've also been told the job market is really strong too. So most of us have a feeling that that is not correct, that that's not true. And there are some signs, some evidence that, in fact, those claims by the Fed and others in the government are actually not true at all. And so what I want to cover in this video is why would bogus jobs data keep being used by the Fed to make interest rate decisions? Because that's what they use the economy. The Fed uses data about the economy and the job market to make decisions about interest rates. Okay, and interest rates have been high for a very long time now. The housing market, if you know anyone in real estate, you know that the housing market is basically dead. There's very little activity, and it's been that way for a while. A lot of us think that for some reason the government is on a different reality path than the population. If you have friends and family and you've talked about the economy, you've talked about the job market, you suspect that they're not telling us the truth, that they're not being forthcoming. They're painting a rosy picture for some reason. And what I'm going to present here is a possible motive for that, a possible motive. It's a financial motive. And so let me jump into this. So some of the evidence that the economy is not as rosy as the government, the Fed, Jerome Powell has been telling us. SNAP and housing assistance has been increasing lately. SNAP, food stamps, housing assistance, Section 8 housing has been increasing. So that usually doesn't happen. If the economy is so strong that it's creating inflation, there would not be an increase in the use of housing assistance and SNAP. And the other evidence is the strong jobs report. Every time the Fed makes an announcement, they always claim the job market is strong. It's very healthy. But you wait a few months and they correct the job numbers downward. Very frequently, the Fed goes in front of the public and says the job market's healthy, we're creating lots of jobs. A few months later, they say, whoops, then those numbers are wrong. The job market is actually not as vibrant as we initially thought. So most everyone listens to the initial Fed announcement, the job market's great. And fewer people pay attention when they revise the numbers downward. But I'm going to give you an example in this that you'll probably remember. It was a big downward revision of job creation. So there is evidence that the Fed is not, the government and the Fed, they're not being forthcoming with an accurate picture of the economy and the job market. And the question is, why would they be misleading like this? Why is it that the jobs report is so frequently revised downward? There's got to be something behind that, because it's not like every once in a while. It's been very frequent over the last few years. So here's the example that you'll probably remember. Late last year, 2024, the government announced there are 818,000 jobs that were actually not created. We announced that they had been created, and they weren't. That was a big change. Almost 1 million jobs vanished. So they stood on a soapbox. The Fed told everyone the job market's healthy. And late last year, they said, actually, no. 818,000 jobs were never created. You can find that information online. There's lots of reports about this number, 818,000. So the Fed is up to something. They're misleading the public about the number of jobs being created and about the status of the economy. Most of us know the job market sucks. Most of us know the economy is not that great either, right? So what is the motive? There is this is a possibility. This is just food for thought, okay? Food for thought. We know that we're being fed bogus information that's revised later downward. What's the motive? Is there a subversive motive, some subversion behind the scenes, engaging in some activity that is contrary to the best interest of the affected people, the population, us? So why are interest rates too high for too long? Because the Fed is making interest rate decisions on data that they are later revising down. They're saying we have this strong jobs number, so we're not going to reduce interest rates. And then later, whoops, the jobs were much weaker than we thought. But they don't lower interest rates. Okay, They are keeping interest rates too high. This is one possible motive, to prevent the refinancing of assets, to force liquidation of high-end assets. That includes apartment buildings, office buildings, acquisitions of companies. There's a complete list of assets that must be sold at fire sale prices when interest rates are too high. So the possible motive, or one possible motive for this bogus jobs data being used to justify high interest rates, one possible motive is to force liquidation of high value assets. So here's how it could work. If you want to buy pennies on the dollar assets, you could approach the people who provide data to the Fed. That would be the Bureau of Labor Statistics. You could buy off the top people in the BLS. Again, this is just supposition. This is just food for thought. Provide data to the Fed that's inaccurate to ensure that the Fed will not lower interest rates. And you sit on the sidelines waiting for people to not be able to refinance their assets and have to sell them at fire sale prices. Apartment buildings, office buildings, private equity, company acquisitions, and a lot of other assets where debt is involved. And so many of you may not know how debt for these kinds of assets works. When someone buys an asset like an apartment complex or an office tower, or they acquire a company, a private equity group, they borrow on a 10-year cycle. They have to refinance at the end of the 10 years or sell the asset. If interest rates are too high, oftentimes they are forced to liquidate the asset against their will. Unless they can raise additional money to hold on to the asset, which is very difficult, they're forced to sell. So here's what's been happening for the last year or so. Apartment buildings, office buildings, private equity acquired companies have been getting sold at fire sale prices because interest rates are so high, they are not able to refinance at the end of the 10-year term of the loans into a new loan. If interest rates were lower, there wouldn't be these fire sales. All over the country, there have been pennies on the dollar sales of apartment complexes, companies owned by private equity groups, office towers, and a lot of other high-end assets. They were blocked from refinancing because of these high interest rates. So I hope you get the picture. A group could capture the Bureau of Labor Statistics, manipulate the data, give it to the Fed. The Fed makes an interest rate decision on bogus jobs data to keep interest rates high. Those groups wait on the sidelines for people to lose the assets, and they buy the assets for pennies on the dollar. That's the scam, and I think it's a scam. And I would not be surprised if this is going on. You know, it's pretty difficult to justify, to explain that big of a miss. With the Fed up on the soapbox claiming over a period of time 818,000 jobs were created, and then to have that set to zero, that's pretty difficult to explain unless it was on purpose. So I have a strong suspicion there has been a systematic method by people, with a lot of money, and I'm not going to name names, but you can probably figure that out. Groups that have a lot of money that would like to buy cheap assets. How do we do it? We will keep interest rates so high that owners of these high-end assets will not be able to refinance. They'll be forced to sell. We will buy them for pennies on the dollar. So the crux, artificially high interest rates have been creating opportunities to buy pennies on the dollar assets. These 10-year loans, they're not able, the owners cannot roll over the debt because interest rates have been kept arbitrarily high for too long. So that's, this is food for thought, but there's just been too much evidence that the economy is much worse than the Fed has been claiming. The SNAP and housing assistance increase, the very frequent downward revision of the jobs data, this huge reset to zero, 818,000 jobs reset to zero. There is too much evidence that the Fed is getting on the soapbox and telling stories about invalid data, bogus jobs data. And I've laid out a reason, I've laid out a subversive motive why that might be happening. Very large groups could, if you think about executives at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, you would approach them and say, look, we want you to give the Fed bogus numbers. Here's 200 grand. That's twice their annual salary. You can just imagine something like that happening. I'm not saying that is happening. I'm saying it is a possibility. So if the expectation that, because I've talked to people about this, and there's general agreement that, if Powell suspects this, he's certainly not doing anything about it or saying anything about it. But you would think that with the frequently revised downward numbers of jobs created, especially this big miss, you would think that those people would say, wait a minute, we keep getting up on our soapbox and announcing strong economy, strong jobs, and then later these numbers turn out to be very incorrect. 818,000, that's a big number. Let's dig into this. Let's figure out why the data that we've been using to make interest rate decisions is wrong. We are being fed data that is not correct. So are there other possible reasons why the Fed could be making these claims about very strong economy, very strong job market? Yes, there are other possibilities. And I tried to say at the beginning, this is food for thought. This is one possibility. There are other things that could be making them use unreliable data. But someone with common sense would have stopped, especially after this big number, would have stopped the show and said, wait a minute, this jobs data seems to be systematically too high and wrong. And since we're using this data to set interest rates, we're going to have to go back to ground zero, to square one, and find out why we are being given data that's always revised downward, almost always, or very frequently revised lower, and fix that problem, because we have to make accurate decisions on interest rates. Meanwhile, here's an example of an asset that, okay, this was an apartment, Jack London Square Apartments in the San Francisco Bay Area. It was a $28 million property that sold for half of that, $14 million. Fire sale price, forced to liquidate. So when these owners of these assets are blocked from rolling over, from refinancing their 10-year loans because interest rates are too high, they have to dump the assets on the market. And here's the most critical detail. That has been going on all over the country. So it's been happening so frequently that when an apartment complex owner has to fire sale their property, there are a lot of other properties on the market at the same time for the same reason, not able to roll over the debt, not able to refinance the debt. And when there's a huge supply of properties being dumped on the market, the price goes down. So I highly suspect that there are players involved in feeding the Fed bogus jobs data. And it is bogus. 818,000 jobs that were announced to have been created, and then it turns out none of those were created. It's obvious. So doesn't pass the smell test. So if you have any questions about this, I've been watching this for over a year, and all the people I talk to, and I think probably a lot of you have been suspicious about, the economy does not feel as strong as what the government has been telling us. The job market, likewise, does not feel as strong as we're being led to believe. Housing assistance is up. SNAP assistance is up in the last couple of years. So, and the numbers are always revised now. So if you have any questions, please post in the comments. It's pretty tragic when someone is blocked from refinancing and they have to sell their property. This is just one example. If you go online, this apartment property that sold for 50% of its actual value, there are tons of those kinds of properties around the U.S. that's been happening too. Private equity assets, companies, office properties, apartment properties, and other types of assets that they were not able to refinance their loan. Very suspicious. And there is a subversive motive behind it. That's what I think anyways. That's my opinion. I'd be happy to answer any questions. You can post in the comments. I really want to thank everyone for watching, and have a great day.